French intelligence report that Russian agents have actually conducted a huge and bizarre stunt in France. But is this a larger part of a Russian campaign to influence the French public? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to talk about why and just what Russia is so afraid of. Let's get into it. Okay, so actually the best write-up of this that I found is actually on Al Jazeera, right? Sometimes Al Jazeera, they're a good news outlet except for a couple of types of stories, right? But this is a good one. This is a good write-up. And so they're describing an Eiffel Tower coffin stunt, okay? And this is, I'm going to see if I can find the pictures. But essentially, what the Russians did was, here's a picture of it. They put out a bunch of mock coffins in front of the Eiffel Tower, draped in French flags. You can see them here, dressed kind of as maybe utility workers or something, but assembling these coffins as part of a publicity stunt. The message, there was a poster with it that said French soldiers killed in Ukraine. This was clearly, well, obviously this was a political statement, but the important thing is who's in it, right? And the reality, when you look, you realize that it's actually was Russia that did it. Russia, of course, the French, okay. French authorities have said that Russia organized the stunt in response to President Macron's suggestion that France could send members of the military to Ukraine to aid and train its forces or allow French weapons to strike in Russia. But what's interesting is that the individuals arrested for this are not actually Russian citizens, but reportedly were a Ukrainian, a German, and I think a Russian, who said they were paid to actually conduct the stunt. And this actually seems like kind of a Russian MO, where instead of having highly trained operatives conduct these kind of stunts, instead it seems like they're relying on very unsophisticated, very simple stooges who receive nominal amounts of money in exchange for doing these things. And so when you see these Russian actions, you go, man, that's really amateurish. I think that's the point. I think Russia is bankrolling amateurs to do these sort of things. I strongly suspect that the story that we talked about earlier of the Chechen who was taking photographs at the house of a U.S. Armed Special Forces colonel, he was, I suspect now that he was not a professional intelligence operative, because a professional intelligence operative would know at least how to de-escalate a situation, play dumb, and leave quickly when caught. The fact that he decided to just have a shouting match and a physical altercation with a special forces colonel who was armed, to me says this guy was not a trained intelligence operative, but instead was probably someone who knew they would taken orders from Russia to go to this guy's house and photograph it, possibly to go and install some piece of gear or equipment, but he was not actually but he himself probably did not understand that he was doing so on behalf of a large intelligence apparatus. Or he may have thought he was, but Russia knew this dude. There was a good chance he was going to get caught and punished. And that's, I think, the case here, where these individuals are likely stooges. They're not trained Russian intel operatives. They're just some people who actually did just get a small nominal amount of money. The Russians may have said, "Oh, it's our political organization, or there's an artist who wants to do this thing," and they said, "Yeah, $3,000-4,000." They may have even known that it's Russian backed, but they may have been like, "Well, it's not a crime, so you're paying me $5,000, $5,000 at $5,000 or whatever." And this is, of course, part of a Kremlin-backed interference campaign, right? This is a larger campaign. And so, yeah, while this is immediately meant to create a perception of discord, of contestation, and seems to be how Russia loves to do its influence operations in democracies, right? It views democracy as an inherently weak system. And so it says, listen, if we can create the perception that there's not a consensus or broad support for policies, then we can actually freeze or gridlock the democratic system, right? And so Russia does this in a whole bunch of ways, right? And this is one example of it, where they're creating a very public, a literal spectacle, trying to convince the French public that there's actually a lot of debate, that there's no consensus, or that there's a substantial anti-interventionist wing in French foreign policy. But the reality is that France hates Russia. They've hated Russia longer than us, the United States, have been a country. And that French interventions overseas are actually pretty typical and not really all that controversial. Again, the French fought for almost a decade a counterinsurgency in Mali. So the fact that Russia wants to create this perception is likely a core of it. They don't want to convince most French. They just need to convince some French that their reluctance is actually a broadly held position. That's the thing. Once you believe that there's a lot of like-minded people, people will actually double down on a point they kind of feel is true at baseline. Now, this is just part, though, of a Russian campaign, and I thought this was really interesting, right? French media have been told by the French, they say the French police, but think French FBI. That's who does these kind of counterintelligence work. That right after the outbreak of the war in Gaza, more than 200 paintings of the Star of David appeared on buildings around Paris. France found that this was actually a Russian destabilization campaign, right? It also partnered it with social media accounts to whip up controversy and confusion about the symbols and feed a perception that there's actually surging anti-Semitism. Why is this? Well, it's likely Russia serving its ally Iran, who, through Hezbollah, backs Hamas. So, and is continuing this sense of sort of dividing the West's attention. And you saw how successful it was in the United States. You noticed that a lot of right-wing politicians demanded that Israeli aid got linked to Ukraine aid. So you took a position that's very popular, which is supporting Ukraine in its fight for to maintain its independence against Russia, and something very controversial, the Israeli-Hamas conflict, and you linked those two in the public's mind, or at least in the politician's mind. Therefore, right, it actually served to significantly delay the provision of that aid. And when they did the investigation, they found who was doing these Stars of David? A Moldovan couple who said they acted on orders from, quote, an individual in Russia. Last month, of course, red hands painted on the Holocaust Memorial in Paris. Police believe the perpetrators fled abroad. Now, again, the 3 men arrested over the stunt, oh gosh, they said they weren't even paid 5,000 euros. They were paid $434 to deposit the coffins. So likely someone else made them, someone else purchased them. So there was no real perpetrator for them to pin it on, right? And they probably said, listen, we just thought we were helping like an artist or a performance artist or some kind of NGO, some sort of NGO, right? There's no real crime. It's pretty innocuous. But Moscow, of course, is even more mad because Microsoft even is coming out, right? Not even an intelligence agency. Microsoft is reporting that Russia is stepping up its online disinformation campaign, taking aim at France for the upcoming Paris Olympics, saying basically that the Summer Games will be marred by violence. And this is, again, really interesting. It's meant, some of it is just meant for chaos's sake. And don't underestimate the appeal of implementing a chaos's sake policy. And before we talk about that too much, if you're interested in seeing the state of the front lines, that video actually just dropped on Combat Vet News. You guys know we've partnered here at this channel with Ukraine Aid Ops, a 501c3 charity in the United States, to support the Lyut Brigade. These guys are out in Vovchansk holding back the Russians, actually taking back a significant portion of Vovchansk, depending on the map you use. And we are helping them out. And so I've done an analysis of some of the combat footage of their fighting, including a very interesting kind of squad on squad, house to house battle that just dropped today. So if you want to support me and this channel, you can do so by becoming a member. Any one of these tiers will get you access to those twice weekly videos. We're going to be piloting some new benefits for the lieutenant and colonel tiers. So if you are, stand by. And if you want to support me, man, I appreciate you guys so much. That's why you get the shout outs at the end of the videos. But check us out, combatvetnews.com. And I'll also throw a link in the description to the donation link if you want to support the guys of the Lyut Brigade. Okay. Why then does Russia want to just create chaos for chaos's sake? Well, it's much harder to govern a divided society. And this is, if you need a case study, look no further than the Iraq War. What happened in the Iraq War? U.S. invaded, booted out Saddam, and there was actually relative peace in Iraq for a couple of months. And then the Americans, right? Every Al-Qaeda affiliate, every Al-Qaeda loyalist in the Middle East traveled to Iraq because they said that's where the Americans are. And we are going to have our chance to strike at the evil Americans. So they went there and they tried to strike at the Americans. And the answer is they weren't really that successful. The American military is pretty good. It protects itself well. And the American military has a pretty staunch commitment to protecting civilians. And the civilians actually didn't really like Al-Qaeda that much. But two things happened. The first was Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib showed the U.S. violating the law of war, torturing prisoners in Iraqi prison, right? Prisoners who were held by the Iraqis or by the U.S. forces. A huge violation of the law of war. And the U.S. tried to suppress or pretended those photos weren't real. And then when they were real, they only prosecuted the lowest level of offenders. That infuriated a lot of Iraqis. But Al-Qaeda was like, we need to take advantage of this. And we're going to destabilize Iraq because we aren't going to just target the Americans. We are going to target every sector of Iraqi society. We are going to make every single group of Iraqis believe that they are the victims, that they are under siege. And so Al-Qaeda in Iraq would bomb Shia holy sites. And then Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a few weeks later, would bomb a Sunni holy site in the same neighborhood. They would kill markets, conduct massacres in crowded markets, right? They would run IEDs. They would just create an environment in which the person that every Iraqi sort of suspected, or the group of people that the Iraqis sort of suspected were bad all along, their minds instantly said, we know who bombed the Shia mosque. It could only be the people who hate Shias, the Sunnis. And they would sit there and say, and so what you had is this tribal bifurcation or trifurcation, really. You had the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shia. And these folks, just their hatred for each other drove and fueled violence, right? And then when you had this mass violence, you had other instances in which Sunnis or Shias in different regions would believe the U.S. military was loyal to the other side. So leaving the U.S. military in the crossfire, Al-Qaeda in Iraq would still target the U.S. military. They would target Iraqi security forces who would try to keep a damper on the situation. They would actually dress as or sometimes infiltrate the security forces so that Iraqi police themselves would be the ones appear to be the ones conducting these massacres, these targeting of civilians. And when you do that, what you do is you create an uncontainable level of division. Now, Russia isn't trying to do that physically with violence, but what they're trying to do is do it much cheaper through ideology. They're trying to convince that there's a huge divide among the French, that nothing is safe. Their world isn't safe, right? Because that's the thing. The goal was not to kill civilians. Killing civilians was a vehicle to convince Iraqis that their world and their neighbors were an imminent threat and needed to be addressed. That was Al-Qaeda in Iraq's strategy. And Russia has taken this, right? This idea, and it said, listen, we can do it for cheap. We can do it without leaving Moscow by telling people untrue things about their safety. That French trainers in Ukraine will be killed en masse by Russia. Unlikely to be true, because if Russia could kill trainers en masse, they would kill the Ukrainian trainers. They would already be bombing Ukrainian training sites. But the fact that they can't is indicative of the fact that they probably wouldn't be able to kill the French either. Not at scale. Undoubtedly, right? If you go to a war zone, there's a chance you'll be killed, but the chance is not that great. Right? You also have a bifurcation among the anti-Semitism, right? The left and right. This is it's a real divide that real people have, like really good people who aren't corrupted by foreign propaganda are divided on Israel, Gaza. But if you're Russia, you want to take it and go, we want to split this idea as far as possible. It's not enough to say, oh, I don't like the Israeli policies in the way they're conducting this war. Russia wants you to say the Israelis are genocidal. And it's inherent. It's every Jew is genocidal. That's what they want. They want to slide. I disagree with Israeli policy. They should protect civilians more. And they want you to be like, all Jews are genocidal. You can't sit there and go, man, the Palestinian civilians, man, they're suffering, and this is not fair to them, right? Or whatever your stance is. You go, oh, the Israelis have a right to defend themselves for October 7th. No, they want you to push yourself all the way over and say, actually, this is inherent to the Palestinians. The Palestinians themselves are inherently the problem. And only through the complete extermination of Gaza as a place can it be solved, right? That Russia's goal is to take real disagreements and spread them as far apart as possible. And that's what they're trying to do here with the anti-Semitic attacks, right? Once you see that, right? What do the French Jews think when they see that? They go, I knew it. I knew that Hamas is right here, that they hate us, that the people that criticize Israel are actually just anti-Semites. I knew it all along. When in fact, that's not true at all, right? It was Russia. Same with the security issues. People are going to go, the government can't keep us safe. I think I know why. It's because that other group that's different from me. It's because they let those migrants into Paris. That's what does it. So instead of saying, again, oh, I have concerns about the French migration policy, their goal is to say, oh, every time I see one of those migrants from overseas, I know I'm less safe, right? That's standard Russian stuff, and it's targeting the French. So to me, it's a sign, a little bit of Russian desperation, but the problem is it can work. It can work. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and check us out on Combat Vet News and donate to the guys at the Liute Brigade who are putting rounds in crowns. No amount of propaganda can save you from a bullet. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. See you in the next one. Cheers.